Hi Clive, how are you?
I'm very well, Eric. How's things?
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I was just saying it's quite strange. I've got a better connection to you right now, visually and audio, 10,000 miles away than I do to some of my neighbours when
Yeah.
I'm FaceTime.
From the Gold Coast of Australia to Aberdeen, and it's a
Yeah,
really good connection. That's great.
exactly. So I was reading a little bit. You've had some light restrictions lifted a little bit in Queensland. You're able to sort of move a little bit more, right?
Yeah, we can have a picnic,
Wow.
which is nice.
Yeah.
And it's still got to be with your family bubble, or you can have one person who's not in your family bubble. So,
Wow.
but you know, we can go to the shops and you know go to a restaurant and at least not eat in there, but we can take it away, sit in the park, or so yeah, it's nice to get out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the reason for having you on is, again, the power of social media and the sort of digital transformation that we're going through. I saw a post of yours, and it was I reckon it to hearing a good song in another room from a radio and going, oh, that sounds pretty good. That, and it just sort of perks your head up like a little meerkat. The post that you put up was just a lovely slide with your company logo on it that said, "Behaviours are not the problem. Behaviours are expressions of the problem," and that just smacked me between the eyes. So I thought that'd be a nice segue into starting this Crux cast. This is all about psychological safety and your views on behaviour-based safety. Do you want to just tell us a bit about your background and how you came to this point where you're so vocal about this subject?
So vocal, yeah. So unsurprisingly, my background is psychology. I'm a psychologist. I don't come from the school of behaviorism, which I'll come back to shortly. I never intended that little saying, by the way, to be particularly controversial. I didn't think it was particularly controversial, but there are a few people out there who almost belong to the church of behaviorism. Yeah. And should you suggest, you know, something other than behaviorism is a good thing, man, they can come down in you like a ton of bricks. So yeah, has been controversial, was not intended to be. So look, I come from more the humanistic schools of psychology, cognitive psychology, humanistic, positive psychology. And look, I was not in the safety game. This is going back 25 years or thereabouts. And I was working mostly in clinical and counselling positions. Did many years in the addictions field. And right. In that field, unfortunately, you know, running rehabs, drug and alcohol rehabs occasionally, part of that job is the tough part of that job is you sometimes have to bring parents in and let them know that their son or daughter is never coming home again. You know, they because of a drug-related incident, they passed away. So I did a lot of grief counselling. And over the years, that's, I guess, skill set, because it's never an easy field. Grief counselling is a very difficult field, but that lent me towards doing some EAP work, right, with people who'd lost loved ones in, you know, high hazard industries, mining, oil and gas. And look, I started scratching my head a little bit, and with the amount of fatalities in those high, even though there's a lot less than there used to be, which is a great thing, still so many fatalities and you know, major injuries. And so I joined at that stage a consultancy, and I didn't really want to get into org psych. I was very snobbish at the time. You know, us clinicians do all the hard work and you guys get lots of money for doing org psych. But these guys, with the best of intent, were looking at trying to reduce severe injuries, mostly in mining, oil and gas. And look, I joined that consultancy for a while, learned a lot. But still, to me, I'm a psychologist, so I'm a research-based animal. And so I started looking at the predictors, what out there talks about, you know, points to things that actually work. And as a psychologist, the psychological aspects that actually work to reduce rates of injury. And the one I kept coming across was not behaviorism, not behaviour-based safety, but trust.
Right.
And for me, trust is, you know, you could put in that bucket of what people call soft skills, which I think is a very misleading descriptor. They're very difficult skills to master. But for me, the more I looked at the research, and it made sense to me intuitively as well, that is, if a team in a high hazard industry does not have trust within their management, or even trust within their own team to a degree, if there is something not right, if there is an issue, if there's a challenge, or even if there's just a better, safer way to do things, if trust is lacking, what I've found is if trust is low, fear is high. And if fear is high around speaking up, people simply won't do it. And look, put another way, with the best will in the world, with the best stops, take fives, all the stuff you'd be familiar with after all your years in the industry. Yep. Well-intended tools can do some good, without doubt. But if people are filling them in the crib room, if people are too frightened to write somebody up and to report an incident because the last person that reported an incident is not here anymore, he's somewhere else, it's not going to work as well as it was intended to be. The more I looked into it, Eric, the more we can overlap then with the concept of psychological safety. We have an absence of psychological safety. Nothing works as well as it could. And that is particularly, I believe, the case for safety. That's a nutshell version, mate.
It's intriguing because we had 5 minutes before we started recording, and I told you a bit about my life. I used to work in an industry where I was in health and safety. We had 2 facilities in different parts of the country, not connected in any way, exactly the same in design, exactly the same in terms of crew structure, same reading from the same manuals, same procedures, same processes, one in a really tough place when it came to incidents and accidents and problems, and one that had ascended all of that was in a different place, that had very few incidents, and if they did, they were minor. So I was intrigued by the fact that how can you have these things that are essentially, okay, they're in different parts of the country, but when you open the door and walk into them, it's like being in the same place with the same structure. After years of analysis and even working with psychologists, I brought a psychologist over from New Zealand to try and help us get to the bottom of this issue. It came down to the fact that it was all just about that issue. There was significant trust here amongst this crew. The senior team had coffee with the guys, in the same room as the guys. The senior team were out working with the guys. I noticed that as, after a few months, what's the big difference here? There's really a them and us over here. The senior team don't come out onto the field of play. And in this place over here, which is doing well, the senior team are actually in amongst it. They know each other. They're having banter and jokes and things like that, but they understand the structure. It came down to trust. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that it does come down to trust. Is from a psychological perspective, you can't buy a box of trust and just sprinkle it out there and suck it in. So what is it? What is this thing, trust, from a psychological perspective?
What is this thing, trust? And psychological safety, its cousin, psychological safety. And I think you've just nailed part of the problem, Eric, which is because it is apparently less tangible, or in most people's minds less tangible than writing a new procedure. That is tangible. You can put a guard in place. You can touch that. You can see that. So what most companies do is they work on brand new policies and procedures, or revising policies and procedures, usually without the input from the teams, by the way. They just write them, then impose them upon the teams who do the work, and so forth. And you can have as many policies and procedures as you like, but if people don't use them as intended, or if they just don't fit the job they do, they're really going to count for very little. So what is trust? It's a really good question. Feels intuitive, like we all know what trust is. We certainly feel mistrust, and we know what that is, whether it's work or our personal lives. We know what that feels like. But they're 2 separate variables, by the way. Trust and mistrust are separate variables, but let me focus on trust for now. A lot of the research points to, and the research I based much of the work in my book on, is Myers' model, which focuses on 3 core areas, 3 factors, if you like. One of those key factors you've got to have to build trust if you're a leader is integrity. Do what we said you were going to do. That's intuitive. You get that. When somebody doesn't do what they said they were going to do, they lack that integrity factor, and you're less likely to trust them. Interestingly, the second factor is competence, which comes back to ability. And again, no team expects their boss to know everything, and nobody does. But if we've overblown our qualifications, for example, if I've said, I know how to do this, I'm the master of this, but then I can't live up to that, people can lose trust very, very quickly. And we've probably all had a boss like that occasionally. So those are the first 2 factors, integrity, competence. The third factor is what the academics call benevolence. Right. And all that means is care. That's all it means. In other words, to what degree do, as a leader, do I actually get involved, as you were mentioning before, have coffee with the guys? Do I know their story? Do they know my story? Do I invite them in to get their perspective on things? Am I perceived to demonstrate care for them? Do they reckon I care about them is the bottom line. So those are the three factors. And interestingly, you need all three.
Right.
It's all right to care about your people, but if you, again, don't do what you said you were going to do, if you don't display integrity, you'll still lose trust. What is very interesting is that to build trust in the first place, while they're all important, that integrity factor is really important to build trust in the first place. To overcome mistrust, which is the field we often end up working the most in, unfortunately, but to overcome mistrust, it is that care factor, that benevolence factor that is the most important.
Okay.
And these, again, while they might be regarded as soft skills, unless management can actually display care, bring people in, talk with them, get to know them. Actually, if they've got a new policy or procedure or system to write, bring the teams in and ask them.
Yeah.
That's an act of care. And so those three factors are the main areas where leaders can or sometimes don't build trust.
Okay, I get it. One of the comments that I've seen you write is that trust walks in the door, but it leaves on horseback, and it's so true. It's so true. It can, it can just be smashed to pieces in something just in an instant, right? Just a look, a comment. It's so getting a hold of this thing, trust, and actually keeping that trust there. If this is so important to get into that sort of progressive state of safety culture or whatever you want to call it, then it's a thing you need to put a lot of time and effort into, right? This isn't something you're just going to be able to do overnight.
No, but you can certainly make a start overnight. And even though I did put that quote out there, trust can take time to build. It does take time to build. And as you point out there, it leaves on horseback, man, it can fly out the door. Just recently, I was working with a client who had done some great work, in starting, I just call it just tweaking the dial. If we can just move the dial up a little bit, but do that consistently, it pays huge dividends. And they've been doing that. And then they did have a significant injury. And what they did, and this is not uncommon, you would know this yourself, Eric, is they actually put that guy on light duties. They didn't have to count it as a lost time injury. Mm-hmm. Now, look, sometimes we can do that. It suits both parties to do that. But on this occasion, it was done, and it was fairly obvious to everybody involved. It was done just purely for the metrics.
Yep.
They were going for the old zero harm notion. And that would really bugger up their figures, right? So they said, well, let's bring him back on light duties. In that moment, what has happened to trust in the workforce? Well, all the gains that had been made to that point, they just went straight down.
Absolutely.
So it is about consistency in those behaviours. You need to be consistent. It's values-based leadership, really, is what that aspect of it comes down to, that integrity aspect. The other part of it, the care, so much of it is communication-based.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just speaking in particular ways.
So going back to the root of all of this and what caught my attention. So behaviour-based safety programs, I think they've been with us since the mid-70s, right? They've been around in some shape or form. So you might be one of the viewers watching this might know it. When you ask people to describe what's behavioural-based safety, it's become, certainly in Aberdeen and in the communities that I sort of frequent, the European oil and gas world, it's become hold the handrails and put coffee cup lids on. That's what some people think it might be. Other people might think it's, it means that we've got to grass on our mates when they do something wrong and write it down and submit it, or we get into trouble.
Yeah, well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Look, my take on it. Sorry, Eric, you're going to.
No, carry on. You're taking it. It's your interview.
Okay, my take on this is, and by the way, I never set out to be controversial around this. It's just behaviorism. When I first got into safety after coming from a clinical and a counselling background in psychology, I could not believe straight away, because I'm exposed straight away, 20 years ago and ever since, behaviour-based safety everywhere. Yeah. Now, when I went through uni, when I did my studies, and still to this point, behaviourism is a school of psychology that was largely done. It was done by Skinner and Associates way back, decades and decades ago, mostly on rats and pigeons. And, behaviorism has offered psychology a lot, don't get me wrong, understanding stimulus response, understanding reinforcement protocols and things like that. But it really never passed the human test. Even with dogs and pigeons, it's had some issues. It is mostly based on, it was called back then and still is, the black box approach.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, think of the brain as a black box. The behaviorists didn't really care what happened up here in terms of your cognitions, in terms of your emotions. They just thought, if you give this antecedent and there's a behavior and it's rewarded or punished, that's why you'll get particular results at the end of that. Again, works pretty good with a dog, right? Throw this stick for Rover. He comes back with the stick in his mouth, you give him a treat, he'll do it again.
Yep.
Humans are a bit more complex than that, a little bit. So I was never a fan of the black box approach. I want to know what's going on in the box. Because behaviorism misses cognitions, really. It misses the emotional component. And really, those are the very things that drive our behaviours. And that behaviour-based safety came from that school of behaviorism, which has not been used by any psychologist I know for decades, seriously. All I'm saying is this, I think BBS has done some good. Please let me say that. I think, if nothing else, it helped maybe less mature cultures to at least focus on safety for a while. But to actually build past that and get to being quite a mature culture, behaviorism, there's going to be major challenges with that, because sooner or later, people start to understand that it does feel a bit like dobbing on your mate. It feels like, I have to report this person. Now, again, you might reward somebody for speaking up. And so you might think they'll speak up next time. But if they feel frightened, an emotion, if their thinking is, by speaking up, I might put my mate in jeopardy, he might have a target on his back, I won't do it, regardless of if I was rewarded last time or not. We are not dogs. We're not pigeons. We're much more complex. And sooner or later, behaviorism and behaviour-based safety turns out to be a bit of a blame the worker approach.
Yeah.
And why I'm not a big fan, because in that sense, it's not good for trust. It tends to lower trust and psychological safety. So it's all right up to this point in terms of safety culture maturity, but if you want to progress towards the more proactive, integrated approaches, it's not going to get you there because of largely that thing that we're not black boxes. We have thoughts and feelings, and behaviorism largely misses those.
And I think one of the issues is that people that maybe in the 70s, 80s, or 90s were sort of climbing the ladder and were experienced to, BBS was the way you have to do it, who are now in senior roles, that's really the only reference point that they had, because that's what the big company that they worked for did, and that's what you do. I remember sitting in a room with a senior leader who said, we're going to implement a behavioural safety program, and I said, why would we do that? And the response was, because these people need to stop having stupid incidents. And I thought, wow, because it's almost like if we buy the books, if we buy the videos and buy the little cards, and the people do their training, then that's it. Yeah, that's it. We've addressed that issue. Box is ticked, and now we transfer the problems that we have in this boardroom or this senior team room. We then separate ourselves because it's their problem, not ours.
That's right.
Not ours.
Blame the worker.
Absolutely. So, and in many cases, I don't know what the stats would be, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, most of those problems start in that room. Yeah.
There are the systemic issues and or their leadership issues. And I think most mature leaders who've been around, like yourself, for a while, actually do understand that. In fact, if you look at, you sort of mentioned the Hudson style approach, the ladders, as you go to the upper stages, some of the defining features of the more mature cultures are that actually management do understand that most incidents come back to management decisions. Yeah. And or system issues, not the workers. Whereas the less mature cultures still have exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Most incidents are because of, people doing the wrong thing, taking shortcuts. And again, you can view shortcut as an example of a behavior. And as I say, that's not the problem. The problem is what was driving that. The problem is, what's actually driving that behavior in the first place. Why was he taking a shortcut? Well, maybe the last person who got that job done quickly got rewarded for that, or, which is back to a sort of perverse behaviorist model. You need to understand what is driving people. Whatever it is, it's making sense to that person at that time. Yeah. And that's often a systemic issue and or influenced by leadership.
I often remember how, on that subject of leadership, I often remember when I was a young guy, I used to work as an electrician offshore. And I remember the way it worked was we did a 3-week hitch, and I did a week and a half with one boss and a week and a half with another. Boss A for the first week was into detail, into structure, into planning.
Yeah.
So as a human working for this guy who I clearly wanted to impress, he was my boss. I had to impress him with my level of detail, my level of planning, and my level of structure. So the trigger for me to get the good boy, here's a treat, which was a pat in the head, well done, Eric, that's good, was nice job, well planned, permits are in good order, documentation was good, we took our time, we got it done well, excellent, good job. The next week and a half, and this is not sensationalist by any means, was a boss who was all about get it done, results. I don't care about the structure, I don't care about the planning, I'm not into the detail, I'm not into any of that, I just want it done. So for the first week and a half, I was planner and organizer and structure. The second week, I was a nightmare because I rushed things. I climbed up the ladders without scaffold. I didn't bother to get the documentation because that's what this guy wanted. Now, I thought it was a pretty switched on dude at the time, but then looking back, I realized I was being, there's an example of a person behaving in 2 completely different ways to appease 2 completely different bosses.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It is. And again, you work that out emotionally and cognitively. It's not pure behaviorism, right?
Totally. So the sort of rudiments of what you're all about is that behavioural based safety has helped us in the early stages make some minor improvements and at least put a spotlight on people at work. The new thinking is, I chuckled because you've been putting teasers out about your new book, right? And one of the things that got me was, I'm trying to find the quote here. It's about, I found it. Behavioural based safety has made a positive difference, just as leeches have historically been used in some medical procedures. That doesn't mean I want blood-sucking parasites to be my doctor's go-to diagnostic treatment or method. So you're saying it's had its time.
As you say that, Eric, it sounds a little harsh.
Oh, it's certainly going to get people's attention. So it's had its place, it's had its time. We need to get trust. We need to understand what's going on in here. Surely it's not just as simple as having a cup of coffee with the guys and having a bit of a chat with them and understanding them more. So what is, with the Care Factor program that you're talking about, what's the process?
Sure. Well, that care factor, again, it's that one of 3 factors that actually build trust, but it's historically the one that organisations are the most lacking in. And I don't mean they don't care. And a lot of people think the care factor might be about, you just make people care more or make them care more about safety. No, that's not what it's about. I honestly believe most leaders do actually care about their people anyway.
Yeah.
I believe that to be true. And yet I tend to work, as you have, I think, Eric, in the more what I describe as macho industries.
Yeah.
Construction, mining, oil and gas. And so again, and I've mentioned this recently, it's not that they don't care. They're just really crap at showing that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if they're not demonstrating care, how would their teams know that they actually do? And it's helping about that. And you're right, it's not just having a cup of coffee. And this is where I've got a lot of time for the safety differently approach, if you will, because it tends to dovetail with this approach quite nicely in that it's not about just having coffee, it's about literally bringing your teams in. Stop imposing safety on them. And we do that a lot, all right? So there's been a near miss or an actual incident. So we'll rewrite the policy. We'll put another guard in place. Give that new policy to the team and say, this is how we do it now. They've had no say. If they've had no say, there won't be any buy-in. Why would they buy into things that are just merely imposed upon them? I think safety differently, and the mature organisations do this anyway. They bring their teams in. Right, this is the goal. This is what we need to achieve. This is where we've been having problems. How do you see it? They will come up with the best hazard analysis, or JHA, way better than anything we could impose on it. And lo and behold, if they have helped in the design of that tool, they are way more likely to use it as intended. They'll take ownership of it. It's really not rocket science. Often the safety too, or safety differently advocates, I guess, they talk about something I really like, and that is looking at the difference between work as we imagine it is done versus work as the team to actually do it. And so anytime we write a policy or procedure, it's done based on how we imagine the work is done. And often that's not even the case anyway. If you've got sufficient levels of trust to go to them and say, show me how you do it. Just show me how you do the job. If it's different to what we thought, there's probably a good reason for that. It's probably just better that way, more thorough, quicker maybe, I don't know. There might be risks involved in that. But if you actually watch how the work is done and then work with them, you understand how the work is actually done. Now you're in a much better position to, with your team, actually identify the ways to control the risks and mitigate the risks. You cannot do that as well if you're just imposing stuff on them based on how you imagine the work's done in the first place. And that's often where the disconnect is. Yeah. That's where the systemic issues come from, and often the leadership issues. And then, of course, we have an incident, and traditionally we blame the workers for that. Yeah. You weren't doing it the way you should be. They hadn't been doing it the way they should be for 10 years. We just didn't know that. And so, again, it's partly just this whole notion of bringing the team in with you and getting them pretty much to co-design. Now, that's two-way trust, right? If I'm a leader and I'm saying I want the team to write the hazard or the risk mitigation strategies, that's a leap of faith in me. Yeah. You know, well, what if they stuff it up here? What if somebody gets really badly hurt? So it's very much two-way trust, but it works. And we know it works. There's plenty of, there's a wonderful book out last year, actually, Amy Edmondson's The Fearless Organisation. Okay. And while it's not specifically about our game, the way we know safety, it's about psychological safety, but she lists the current research in that area. And it works. It's staggering. It's just seen as soft skills. And another quote, mate, soft skills are hard, apparently, because a lot of people would much sooner avoid all that touchy-feely stuff and go back to rewriting a policy and putting...
we fall in.
Yep, yep. Listen, we've looked upon this as a little bit of a teaser into your workings, and you've got a book coming out. What's the book going to be called? Are you allowed to say at this point?
Yeah. In fact, the reason I've been putting teasers out, Eric, is because due to COVID-19, the whole production process is somewhat slowed down. Yeah. So I finished writing it some time ago. It's not a long book. It's what they call a focus book. It's really concise. It gets to the point really quickly. But I still believe it will help some of the leaders maybe we've been speaking about, who view it all as soft skills and too hard. It makes the case, quite a compelling case for change, I believe. But it doesn't leave it there. It goes on there, just as we've been discussing now. What are tangible things we can do to just tweak that dial, to actually start moving in that direction? So the book is called Next Generation Safety Leadership, with the subtitle From Compliance to Care. Wow. And that's the journey, yeah. So
and when do you think we're going to be able to get a hold of it?
Well, my publishers got in touch yesterday. It slowed down a bit. They're believing the end of September, hence the teasers, right?
keep them wanting more, right?
I know, but if I keep doing that, I'm going to put the whole bloody book online before it's published. So I better,
we'll be able to just print it off in small bite-sized chunks. Exactly. So the book's coming out, which I urge everyone who's got a mind towards, whether you're a health and safety professional, a manager, director, any type of leader, get your hands on this and try to think about, because it's something I firmly believe that we kind of just, we've got a BBS program, everything's in order, it's fine, but things change, things migrate. Look at the way we got in touch and the way we're talking now. Things evolve, and things should, when you're looking at the safety of people, you should be looking for the next best thing and the next level of information.
Do what works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So how can people get a hold of you, Clive?
The easiest way is through our website, our company website, which is gystconsulting.com.au, GYST, or Grow Your Safety Thinking, consulting.com.au. There's some other articles on there, but it just gives people a feel of what we're about. And tell them to hook up on LinkedIn as well. And I'm keeping people, as you would know, well informed with when the book's due to be published.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It's great to come across someone that makes you think differently and takes you out of your kind of like the comfort easy zone. And, okay, some of your stuff might be looked upon as controversial, but it's actually just challenging something we've got way too comfortable with. Yeah, and it's that's
why it's controversial, right?
Yeah,
never
absolutely.
Intended to be controversial. It's just different.
How dare you prod me to get off the sofa?
How dare I stop you using leeches and go for the antibiotics, huh?
Absolutely. That might be the strapline for this interview. Thank you so much for your time, Clive, and we'll speak to you soon and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Brilliant.
Take care, mate.